Tēnā koutou, no mai haere mai. Welcome to Newsroom, the place where we talk about what's going on in New Zealand and around the world from the point of view of our talented and intelligent panel, who tonight consist of Malcolm Gayfor. Welcome back.
Morning, evening, Bill.
Evening.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, some people may watch a rerun in the morning. Always got a good contribution to make, and journalist Hunter Andrews. Nice to have you with us, Hunter.
Great to be here.
Lots has been on the news, and the Chappelle Corby, Hunter. I saw on the news clip the other night, Chappelle Corby, as we know, has been released from jail in Indonesia on parole, and just the massive media there trying to point cameras in her direction, microphones, came out with her head covered. A slight case of over-attention, do you think?
Yeah, well, I guess it's a typical response to the media. It's been a story that's burned away, and every couple of years she'll pop up again for some sort of government move to try and get her freed early, or an appeal or something like that. And she's always just simmered away, and the Australian media, I guess, are just wanting a good story, and they're prepared to pay for it.
Do you think there's money involved? Is there money involved, Malcolm? Do you think?
There's got to be. But interestingly enough, I read on the internet this morning, one, I think, employee of Channel 7 berated his own company, says we shouldn't be spending reputedly $2 million on this woman. She's not worth it.
Yes.
He's turning on his own employers.
Goodness me.
And the man who's supposed to be getting the first interview, Mike Willesee from Channel 7, he says, no, it's nothing like that, mate. No, $2 million, that's nothing like a cobber, you know.
But what's she going to say that she hasn't, or her lawyers haven't already said in court?
Well, you know,
I mean, she's hardly going to be on parole there going, yeah, actually, I knew the cannabis was there in my boogie board bag. And let's say that this is 5 kilograms of cannabis, so you probably would notice that extra weight. Think 5 litres of water.
But as you know, Hunter, it's, the opportunity to get the first story or the first interview. What is actually said or what comes out is irrelevant. So, first cab off the rank. They pay for that privilege. So, how much they're going to pay and who they're going to pay is anybody's guess. And what answers come out is another anybody's guess.
And she comes out with a veil on, so that you know those exclusive rights for the photos have probably gone somewhere else or whatever.
Exclusive rights all over the place.
It's a great media exercise, and I hope that media students nationwide are looking at it.
It's not about news.
Well, that is the news, I think. It's not that the media are the news. They're making themselves the news.
And in a typical Australian way. And I remember Rachel Morton from TV3, I think late last week when this all started to bubble up, they were expecting an announcement, I think, on Friday night our time. And she was dispatched to Bali, and she said the first couple of media scrums, she said, never seen anything like it like this. And she's been around the traps a while. Yeah. And must have just been wild. Any slight whiff of an announcement, and they were at the door, and bang at the door for it.
The thing that occurred to me is, how much did it cost to have all those journalists there waiting?
Doesn't matter.
I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That's the price they pay. But that's what it costs.
Yeah. Indonesia would welcome them, staying in their hotels and spending money, drinking in their bars or whatever.
Having a go at the midday,
it's all good for Indonesia because they obviously make an example of Westerners that they catch bringing drugs in or out of Indonesia, and too right. Who wants that drug trade?
They look very professional in the whole thing, and I think, to me, just following it casually now and again, I think the courts seem to have dealt with it in a more or less unbiased manner, very professionally.
Well, they know they're being watched.
Yeah.
One thing I think perhaps may have been a slip-up on their part is why didn't they perhaps get her out under the cover of darkness? Quietly, nobody around.
Well, there's no publicity in that.
No,
but at least they are rid of her, and it avoids the sort of clamour.
They might have wanted to be on telly, Malcolm.
I don't think so somehow, but that might have been a tidier way of doing things.
Yes.
Instead of, as you say, all these journalists banging at the gates looking for some crumb, bail her out and say in the middle of the night in a darkened van and
gone.
Gone.
That's right. And then they'll be scrumming around outside the residence where she's going. Which,
quite
which place?
Apparently some luxury lodge.
Is it? Oh, in which place I believe she has to stay till 2017, is it?
Yes, I think the actual official conditions are she's bailed to her sister's house, Mercedes.
Who lives there anyway, with a family. So
until 2017. But at the moment, she's camped out of this luxury lodge. And I suppose that is also the dilemma, they want her released, but what do we do with her? Where do we put her? She might have been in some ways, perverse way, stuck where she was.
Yes.
At least, she's in a controlled situation, and everybody's taken care of. But now, you know, it's almost worse than being locked up. Ghastly conditions, apparently, this place is where she was locked up. But, you know, as one headline says, she's gone from one prison to another.
Yeah, 9 years.
Well, yes, yes.
And once she gets
Probably
to her
with a good
sister's
deal
place,
of less freedom, actually.
yeah, once she gets to her sister's place, there'll be people banging on the door for days to come, weeks to come.
Well, it'll cost them a fair bit to just have the police outside to control the situation, I would say.
Yeah.
Let's stick with Australia and talk about what the Australian supermarket chains are trying to do. Well, I guess they are doing, aren't they? Well, in a nutshell, have said they're taking New Zealand goods, which or their home brands manufactured in New Zealand, off the shelves in order to boost their Buy Australia campaign.
Buy Australia, mate.
Buy Australian made. Exactly.
Well, the first insult there is our products being labelled under the home brand label, you know, second tier stuff.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's actually
Well, that's just gross insult of the highest order, really, isn't it? Yeah. And, you know, I've one or two friends over there, and apparently the Aussies, again, are just ruthless at doing business. And the comment was given to me by a person who's been working there reasonably high up. They don't intend to do business as such, but they just want to rip the next guy off.
right.
That's how they do business. Just rip
Interesting comment.
the next guy off, and it just goes on and on.
It's a purely commercial incident, isn't it? Outside of government control, really, with a free market.
That's what John Key said.
It's two going head to head. I mean, I like the buy New Zealand made, buy local, use local services and that sort of thing. But make sure that the other products are offered as well. Don't remove them from the shelves, because that agreement, I think it was 1982, CER, one of the triumphs of Robert Muldoon's 9 years in office, I have to say, was that we treat our products the same. Like a New Zealand product in Australia should be treated as an Australian product, and an Australian product here should be treated like it's made.
Yeah, but the Aussies are so parochial; they don't really give a rat's.
But so
do
are
they?
we, I think. That if it happened here,
not so.
I think that, you know, we would get similar. I think if two huge chains got together and started promoting Australian products over New Zealand, it's New Zealand products over Australian in that case.
Yeah, again, I don't think they're that strong and perhaps would do that. But again, the Aussies are just so parochial. You see that in their sports teams and their politics. You know, and they even have the temerity to. You quite often see, you know, Australian beef in the supermarkets, don't you? You know, if we were really hard about it, we'd throw that in the rubbish bin.
And I've always felt, you know, in this situation that I'm reasonably okay with buying Australian products, or I have been. You know, they are brothers across the Tasman, brothers and sisters across the Tasman. We stood back to back on many occasions. I thought, well, you know, this is only a slightly second best to New Zealand, better than, say, importing it from some European country from many miles away, etc., etc., etc. You know, Aussies not too bad, we'll eat them, you know. But so I must say I was quite shocked and surprised when they sort of get this anti-New Zealand thing. I thought we were a bit closer than that.
Well, I mean, I have to say that my family's bought Holdens for so many years. I mean, think about the capital.
Not anymore.
That's right. Well, actually, not anymore, because they're not going to make them anymore.
Right, yeah.
But think about the capital that New Zealanders have spent in Australia, New Zealand dollars that disappear over there with our banks that are all Australian.
We're talking billions.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
It is.
It's a lot of money. And comparing to consumer items, it probably pales a little in comparison. But we've bought a lot of Australian products. And, well, I mean, it's pretty close, isn't it, Australia?
Oh,
and
yeah, we are next door neighbours, but unfortunately we are the lesser of the two, the poor cousins.
Now everyone's thinking of the Ford Falcons and everything in their families over the last 40 years.
Yeah, and then they're holding Tiranas. And
we've supported the Australian economy.
Yes. And you know, I agree with what you say, Hunter, about, you know, we do buy made in New Zealand. And that's one thing.
But you've got the choice. They don't remove Australian
products. They've got the choice. They've gone to the next step, haven't they? Actually remove them from the shelves. Yeah. And that's taken the thing up another whole tier.
Yeah.
Probably, I think that, I'm not sure what the gross imports both ways are. I don't know who exports the most to whom.
Oh, I would say we'd take a lot more of their products. Well, automobiles and that, heavy capital items like that, probably.
Yes.
At the moment.
Yes. And certainly in the financial industry, there's a lot, as you pointed out before, there's a lot goes back the other way. If Kiwis decide to get all upset and nasty about that, they could do a bit of damage.
But this will blow over, I'm sure.
Oh,
This will be this will be fish and chip wrapper next week, and those two supermarkets chains will come heads to head, and some other tangent will erupt, and they'll be onto something else.
That's
some
right.
sort of promotion.
Yeah, like the bread wars we had a few years ago.
I imagine John Key saying, "Well, let's just wait. This is the news cycle, and promotions only last a certain time in supermarkets, and there's no fundamentalist movement in Australia saying, yeah, let's get rid of those New Zealand products, mate."
He actually said something which I'd been thinking as well. He said, perhaps we shouldn't be promoting Buy New Zealand, Buy Australia. Perhaps we should be promoting Buy Australasian and stop all this nonsense. So, which I thought was an interesting thought.
But it pays also to look at the labels of stuff when you go to the supermarket. Everything you might think is New Zealand made is not necessarily so. A lot of the cans and packets are made from local and imported products. Hello.
Yes, indeed. And an accusation against a supermarket chain by Shane Jones under parliamentary privilege today, so accusing them more or less of blackmailing the suppliers and saying, unless you give us a cheque, because we haven't made enough money last year, we're taking your products off the shelves.
Oh, apparently, that's what I say, that they are just ruthless.
Yeah, and so we'll have to see where that one goes. And he refused to comment on outside Parliament, so we won't say too much either, but the accusation is certainly there, and I think he's wanting the Commerce Commission to get involved. So supermarkets all in the gun at the moment, or in the news.
On the other hand, though, let's look at the other side of the New Zealand-Australian relationship, which is the bedrock, and with the centenary of the First World War coming up, that bonding will happen, and we'll see how close we were together. History, we've been tied together through history. I think this is just an aberration. I can't imagine.
It's one of those
I can't imagine New Zealand
and we don't have to agree on everything, do we? I mean, even the closest families have punch-ups now and again, have fights. It's actually an indication of the fact you are for everything.
And we'll still go and fight their bushfires.
That's a very valid point you make, Malcolm. We've just sent firefighters over to relieve their stressed and overworked firefighters.
And that happens every second year, doesn't it?
And we would do it at the drop of a hat. There'd be no qualms at all.
And in many respects, Australia and New Zealand do act in a number of ways as one. When you consider the number of New Zealanders who live in Australia, the number of Australians who live here.
Well, there's not a lot here, is there?
No.
And we offer them, not a lot here, and we offer them great deals on benefits and that sort of thing.
That's right.
Why don't they? Can't they see it?
You can come over here and have a benefit.
Apparently, there's 600,000 Kiwis in Queensland alone. So.
600,000?
Yes.
Well, the Australian government at the moment, they're having to deal with a financial crisis, or a looming one. I think they're projecting something like a $41 billion deficit. Well, and our government's saying, hey, we're going to be in surplus. We've been trying to be like Australia and been held up as the economic example. And we've talked about it on the program before. But in reality, we are doing better here. And in reality, they are now facing a crisis, probably stemming from the falling mineral prices or something like that.
You could say John Key got the ultimate prize when he had that game of golf with Barack Obama over the Christmas holidays. And Tony Abbott's probably saying, "Damn, how do I get that close?
Yes.
Just how do I do it?"
He did it. John Key did it.
And that runner from across the fence.
Yeah. Exactly. Talking about across the fence, let's go across the ocean to Russia. The Winter Olympics. Malcolm.
Yes.
You've seen
Are
they? Yes. You've seen it, watched any of it on
I
TV?
saw a wee bit of it on the weekend, just happened to be on.
Yeah.
And, well, what I saw on the ice dancing, actually, some of it was very good, very good.
Yeah.
And well, how can you judge the Winter Olympics on that? I don't know. But the news clips, I made a note here of the ablution arrangements, so the double loos with the spectator seats. That was a bit mystical. Did you not see that?
I heard about it. Yes.
Oh, well, they had. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, the pictures were even better.
No separation.
So instead of having one cubicle with one lavatory, they have two, plus about 3 seats on the other side, and nobody still knows quite who's got to use them or how they're going to be utilised. So we haven't had that appear on YouTube yet, the actual usage of, but
them having spent 61 billion New Zealand
and
dollars
a lot of the
developing 61 billion.
a lot of the hotels, were nowhere near ready.
No.
When teams were starting to arrive, and I think someone went to the hotel and poured a glass of water, and it was sort of brown like that timber there.
Right.
And, typical Olympic Games type thing.
Yes.
Last minute rush.
Yes.
A lot of the money's gone astray.
Really?
I'm hearing, it's
Russia, I suppose.
I
Yeah.
think
It's-
more than half of the money is unaccountable.
Right, and there was an interesting editorial I was reading, published in the New Zealand Herald, and I think it might have been underlined Northern Advocate, and the last comment by the editorial writer was, there is a great, quoting Adam Smith as saying, as Adam Smith remarked, there is a great deal of ruin in a nation, and Sochi exemplifies Russia's capacity to put this on display. So, yeah, I mean, for 60, I couldn't believe this, 61 billion New Zealand dollars.
Oh, New Zealand dollars.
Yeah, New Zealand dollars.
A lot of money.
50 billion US. We're getting very close now, of course. And this is what they've got. Toilet facilities where you have to share with somebody else. And
That's like 120 Anzac frigates.
I know, it's just amazing
Yeah.
the holes in the system that the money was falling through. Must have been incredible. I mean, I read in the news the other day too that there were 4,000 workers hadn't been paid, had been insufficiently paid or not paid at all, and the contractors left town with the loot.
Oh, for goodness.
The contractors must have been paid first and then told to do the job later.
Well,
I can't imagine anything else.
All that other problem with the human rights and that punk rock band being locked
Oh,
up. And,
what do they call it?
we've got to look at. I guess it shows the International Olympic Organisation for what it is, which is also, although they like to deny it, quite corrupt, obviously. And that selection process they go through, and I'm waiting for a gay couple on the podium to kiss. And I mean, that's the headline, isn't it?
Oh, yes, yeah.
That's the. I mean, I can't help but think that everyone said before the 36 Berlin Games that this was going to be good for Germany and all those sorts of things, and they took all the signs down saying Jews don't go here because they didn't want that bad publicity. This is sort of the modern example, and we should look at these countries that get this supposed gift
same thing happened in
to
China.
host the Olympics. Yes, that's that's exactly right. Let's look at these countries in the selection process and give them to the ones that are reforming and making obvious efforts to improve human rights.
But then again, the cost, come back to the cost.
Yeah,
comes
that's it.
into
But let's bring it down. Let's
Wow.
set a limit. Let's say, look, let's make it accessible. I know security is very expensive.
And it's the TV
Venues are very
rights,
expensive, but there must be a way around it. It's like looking at the America's Cup going, well, I didn't want to talk about the America's Cup today.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, let's look at that and say, well, it's far too expensive. We didn't get the competitors we wanted, so we've got to scale it back.
Yep.
So make it affordable for other teams. We want 10 teams next time rather than 3 or whatever. So let's look at the Olympic. Who can afford it anymore?
Oh, that's
realistically,
right, yeah.
who can afford
Well,
it?
Russia has spent, and Russia's a big country, 2.5% of their GDP on it. Having said all that, the athletes do their thing, don't they? I mean, they put their all into it, make the best effort, and probably some of them under some more difficult circumstances, like having to break out of the bathroom with your, the guy who was the ideal guy to get locked in there because he was the pusher for a bobsled. So pushing a door down, there was a picture of the door with a hole in it in the press.
Oh, yes.
It wasn't too much effort for him. But the athletes are doing what they do. I think that athletes in winter sports are the most courageous. They really risk life on limb. I saw one of the poor girls, a Canadian girl who did a big bomb out, a big crash the other day in the freestyle and taken away with suspect broken jaw. I mean, they really do put themselves out there, so good on them. And our Anna Wilcox was 15th in that event and very happy that she had put one good run down, and so good on them,
Yep.
and getting out there and actually doing it and competing, and probably not in the best circumstances that have been around, but they're there. So.
And I think that, two southern competitors, at least the Wells brothers from Central Otago, I think they're still to compete, but they should hopefully be up near the top of the competition. Yeah. And speaking of the ice dancing, there's one young lady, she's doing the dance, and you're almost waiting for something to go wrong.
Oh, yes.
Some of the routines are so intricate, and the skills are so delicate and finely honed, and this girl did collapse on her backside. The most unceremoniously, but a blink of an eye, she was back on her feet and back in business.
Right.
And that brain power,
Yes.
you know, she tripped up, but in time with the music, got on with it.
Yeah.
It did cost her, but it was, you know, the show went on.
It's always good to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you blinked, you probably would have missed it,
Yeah.
the whole thing. And, you know, she just, instinct, I suppose, years of training, knew what to do and how to recover.
It's a particular type of person, and I mean, it's the summer Olympics are exactly the same. You know, years of training over an instant, but people are prepared to do it. And good on them. On that happy note, we're going to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to Newsroom. We're going to think about now a bill which has been put before Parliament, introduced by Tariana Turia. Basically, she wants all labelling off cigarette packets, and she's getting a lot of support at the moment from all the political parties. 95% of them anyway. Is there anyone not opposing it? Not supporting it, Hunter, that you can think of?
John Banks.
Oh, John Banks was the one person, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
he
I
spoke
mean,
in the House
do
today.
you think this is just from the other political parties or from national monitor? Do you think they're just supporting it at the moment? Are they going to carry through with it?
Oh, I'd heard that New Zealand First weren't going to support it on those lines that ACT weren't either, that they are a legitimate business, and as long as, the international law says that they must be able to promote their brand. And that is the truth.
Is this the way that we've heard now that the cigarette companies, of course, will probably try and argue in court against this, the same way they are in Australia.
That's the great thing. Australia's absorbing all the costs of this enormous court case, that we're just going to sit back and wait and see we don't have to carry those costs.
Yeah.
So we're going to watch what happens in Australia. And of course,
should we really be doing
setting.
that? Should we be doing that, or should we be joining in the fray?
Oh, we could probably send a couple of lawyers over, you know.
As long as they weren't home brand.
I think it's huge, and it's interesting that the retailers in Australia are saying that they've had no downturn in cigarette sales since the introduction of plain packaging, as we didn't when dirty great lungs, infected lungs were put on packaging as well. And smokers I've spoken to have said, well, it's going to make no difference to me. But I guess looking at the big picture is, first we've taken them off the back of the counter, whereas you walk into a dairy previously and there would just be cigarettes everywhere. In fact, the dairies used to be painted like a cigarette packet.
They were.
Almost,
Yeah.
You know, it was in your face. The biggest cycling tour in New Zealand was brought to you by Rothmans.
It was.
The cricket was brought to you by Rothmans. I'm not sure whether the All Blacks, because it was before the professional era, but no doubt Steinhager's been involved with them for a long time.
Benson and Hedges, motor racing,
B&H.
fashion,
It was.
parade.
Yes, fashion.
So I guess it's all about just pulling back, legislating slowly over the years, and finally the product becomes quite.
Will the effect be seen, do you think, Malcolm, in the effect be seen in that people won't take up smoking so readily because it's not right in front of their face?
Well, I don't know. You still see lots of young people in particular around town smoking, don't you? And going out the back door for a cigarette break. Instead of the tea break, it's now the smoke break, isn't it?
Yes.
Although it is declining, the Department of Statistics indicate it's on the out, and especially with older people. And
smoke break.
I found out what my brand was when I smoked was it's $17.80
Oh,
for a
apparently
packet of 20.
horrendous now.
Right.
So over 100 a week to maintain a good smoking habit.
Okay.
That's got to count for
You're
something.
thinking about when you smoke. That's
Yeah, well, that's
cost
what it
you.
would cost me now if I was smoking a pack a day.
And I suppose a lot of those people that smoke and spend that money are not overly flush with money, are they? A lot of them be beneficiaries.
So
And that's a lot of money.
And I think they work to that point where burglars think now it's worth breaking into dairies to steal them and sell them on the black market.
Yeah.
And even counterfeit cigarettes. There's such a thing as counterfeit cigarettes. So I guess it's that fine line of people going, yeah, it's too expensive, I'm going to grow my own, which is the other thing you can do if you know how to cure tobacco. But that's a big process to go through. and then, will we get black market cigarettes? So that's that fine point. How expensive can they get?
It'll just drive it underground.
And having said it, it being presented as a legal business, of course the government makes laws, don't they? So they can make it an illegal business. I believe they should
Not
do.
by international trade agreements that we've signed, though, that say that every product that has a right to market itself, its brand, which is...
Yeah.
And I heard Tim
If
Grosser...
it's legal in the country. I mean, they can't come and market cannabis in here, for example, or heroin.
Yeah, but I heard Tim Grosser...
absolutely. But if something's domestically available here already, then it's very hard.
I heard Tim Grosser yesterday, who's up with the play with World Trade.
Yes.
He says the government know they're going to have a fight on their hands. He says, not his exact words, but they know these tobacco companies are powerful, ruthless operators.
Yes.
And they will do anything to protect their brand, protect their patch.
Yeah, you're right. That's the profit-driven area, and it's strange because it's popular culture that people start smuggling. They see movie stars and that sort of thing. That's disappearing from our movie screens. In fact, they're talking about animating out cigarettes in old films, which is a bit politically correct if you ask me. But their big market is China and India. Those are the big markets now for tobacco. Those emerging economies, those third world economies.
Yes.
And so the tobacco market is actually growing. It's declining in the West, but it's growing everywhere else. So they're making money. They've got the money to fight.
We are talking an exceptionally large number of people who basically have cigarettes available to them without restriction in many cases.
And very cheap too in China. China and India.
Right,
and look at
cheap because they don't tax them.
You look at any TV footage of in China, and you see a lot, probably 50%.
Right,
they've always been big smokers, haven't they? Yeah.
Maybe with their emerging economy, I mean, they're going to be in the same position as us, where they're suddenly going to realise that if they're providing healthcare for their people, that it's going to be costing them an enormous amount of money.
I think they've got an enormous problem with just pollution in their cities that's killing people prematurely. So I think they'll get to cigarettes probably in 20, 30 years.
Okay.
If that.
Fair enough too. Well, leave cigarettes there and we'll wait and see what happens, but Tariana Turia seems to be determined and she'll have a lot of support, I think, from the populace.
It is sorry to interrupt, but it is like stripping back. We stopped hanging people in New Zealand in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s. We stopped strapping our kids in schools in the 80s. We stopped sanctioning the hitting of children only a couple of years ago. I guess it's like that. You just phase things out of the public perception and eventually you hope, end goal, we've got less smokers.
Right. We'll wait and see. Now, we've taken offence, Malcolm. We have taken offence at the Shonan Maru 2 or 1, I'm not sure which one.
Shonan Maru,
chasing one of Sea Shepherd's vessels into our economic zone. They've obviously been following them, and I didn't realise this goes on quite a bit, following them around to see what they are doing. And there has been a rebuke from the New Zealand government about them coming into our economic zone, so as distinct from our territorial waters.
Expecting an apology, in fact.
Expecting an apology. Are we going to get it, do you reckon?
No, is the short answer. And I think, again, these Japanese play hardball about these things. And I regret to say, I think something, well, it already has with that boat a couple of years ago got sliced in two by something awful is going to happen down there again in years to come. This won't go away quickly. And of course they had, as I recall a few days ago, Sea Shepherd, I think, reported that they had come across the whaling fleet and they'd dispersed and stopped whaling. Then 2 or 3 days later we had that all on TV with the whaling ships towing steel cables and there sort of seemed to be, cat and mouse game there.
Right. And
they were heading back home and Sea Shepherd heading back to port, and now we have them, following into our territorial waters. So there's a bit of hardball going on there, isn't there?
Right. And you think they're just going to totally ignore the fact that the New Zealand government has expressed its displeasure?
Oh, they'll probably take note that the New Zealand government has expressed its displeasure. I see they sent, I think, the sort of number 2 or number 3 in the Japanese embassy along, not the actual Japanese ambassador, but more lowly character along to receive the government's condemnation.
Right.
And he'll take it back and report back, and they'll duly note and carry on as per usual.
Of course, we're interfering with their science research, aren't we?
Wow.
Warehouse
debatable.
full of whale meat.
Yeah. Well, I think they must be studying scientifically how long it will actually take to kill a complete population of whales out, and then they'll be able to say, well, it took 30 years and we killed the whole lot out, so our research is done.
They can't explain what the research is all about.
No.
No, or can't or won't explain.
They won't explain, and they don't care. And it's
No.
It's not like it's even an ancient part of their diet. The Americans encouraged them after the Second World War to kill whales because the food was so scarce.
Yes.
It's not like, I'm sure
Not a
whaling
tradition.
went on, but it's not
Yes.
that enormous like the Inuits.
right. Who have who take a
yeah.
certain number of seals every year.
Yeah,
They
whales,
take
yeah.
what they
Whales,
need
Whales, yeah.
Yeah.
for their own circumstances.
So it's hard to tell where this is coming from unless it's just honest, straight out. We don't want to admit we're wrong.
You think it might be that?
Possibly.
You're not
the
going to tell
Japanese
us.
can be quite stubborn.
Yes.
Sounds like the Australians.
And so can Europeans too,
Yes, oh, yeah.
which often led to the Japanese being stubborn.
So 6 and 1.5 dozen of the other.
But hey, we bought 700 Corollas in December, I think. So,
Did we?
You know, there's no problem with
Well,
that.
the government has pointed out we have a very good relationship with Japan, as
Oh,
long as we
really?
don't talk about whaling.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but again, Australia has taken a much harder line on this, and some are saying, well, why don't we just take the kind of line that Australia has taken and just be more hard-nosed about it? But I guess we're Kiwis and we haven't.
I think asking for an apology is a pretty hard line. To have the Prime Minister
Okay.
actually make a public statement saying, I expect an apology.
Mm-hmm.
That's diplomatic speak. That's not quiet behind the scenes. That's very public.
Right.
I mean, I guess. I mean, I'm just speculating there, but that's a big move.
So it remains to be seen whether we get one which is sort of veiled with spin, or we get an actual apology.
Or a couple of
Or nothing at all.
Corollas
Couple of
Corollas thrown into it.
Yeah. Again, there's bigger factors at play, particularly trade.
Yes.
So our government's got to be mindful of that. And again, it comes back to the point where just two small islands at the bottom of the ocean, and Japan is or was a major player on the world stage.
So we're really talking, I mean, a couple of topics we've discussed tonight, we're really talking about...
The Japanese Prime Minister is probably also thinking, how did that man Key get a game with Barack Obama?
That's right. I mean, many of the things we talk about here, we're talking about morals taking a second place to money, aren't we, really? I mean, when it comes down to it, as highfalutin as we might be in the Western world, in many respects, we're quite hypocritical. We could think of a number of examples where if it's going to cost us something, we don't protest quite so much.
Well, who talks about Tibet?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Now that
again.
we've got all trade agreements.
That's right. It will just let them rot as long as you'll trade with us. And all those things which in reality we ought to totally despise and take a stand on, but there's not a lot of willingness to do it.
Which we did until there was enormous amounts of revenue in it.
Yes. Yes.
And the Chinese put on the pressure.
Perhaps the Apostle Paul was righter than we thought when he said, love of money is the root of all evil.
How do you think the rest of the world perceives this? I mean, you look at the Rainbow Warrior sinking, and the French put the pressure on when those two agents were on trial, and David Long had to step down and go, well, you don't have to serve 10 years in prison. Why don't you just go to Howe Atoll there in the Pacific and we'll
Forget about
quits.
Where it's warmer.
And so what they look at New Zealand as a country of 4 million that have these great, perceived standards and that sort of thing, and then at the end of the day, we are just a little player with a big mouth, though, quite a big mouth.
Yes, yes.
I think at that time there were some quite delicate negotiations going on in Europe, weren't there? And I think the threat was France would derail those negotiations. It came back to trade and influence again.
Indeed.
And it wasn't a good time for New Zealand agriculture.
No.
SMPs, Labor just thrown at SMPs, destroyed the rural bank, and then suddenly we've got France looking at telling everyone in Europe not to buy our butter.
Yeah, we'll get it somewhere else, thank you.
It all got terribly awkward very quickly, didn't it?
Yes, yeah.
But do you still remember that French, I was going to say terrorist, that Frenchman's name who bombed the Rainbow Warrior?
Dominic Prieur and Alain
Alain Lafar, we do remember.
And what
we
they
know
were
about these guys.
trianges, they were travelling as Swedish tourists, I think.
Yes.
The honeymooners.
Yes.
Yep, that's right.
Interesting. That sort of perhaps shows our age just a little bit. There's plenty of people who wouldn't know those two names. Let's just come back local a bit, and we have a bit of a crisis out here in Invercargill with our Anderson Park Art Gallery.
Well, this is a thing that is going to affect, I think, towns and cities up and down the country. For those outside, the Regent Anderson Park Art Gallery, it's a magnificent, once stately manor at the outskirts of town. It's now converted to an art gallery, gifted by the Anderson family to the City Council some years ago. And with the new earthquake laws and regulations, it's fallen foul of that. With the concrete masonry, what does it fail about, or complies with about 12% of the new building code? And
It should be about 30, 33.
yeah, and it all came up very quickly, didn't it? And
Yes, after the report was done.
You've got
Yeah.
to hand it to the council. They react quickly.
And that's probably the thing we should be talking about. The council is doing what the council has to do, and they've made a tough call there,
yeah, and
being the building owners.
again, people out of town watching this, and a lot of people do, we've got the historic water tower, which was one of the first buildings to be closed for public access a couple of years ago. And there's talk now of the distinctive Southland Museum and Art Gallery, the pyramid structure, that's
Well,
also...
that isn't reached standards. We're waiting to hear, aren't we, what
Yeah.
the actual standard it's met is.
Yeah, but as I say, this will be going on in towns and cities up and down the country, and one of the ramifications will fall out from the Christchurch earthquakes. And even sadder thing is about half a dozen people work at Anderson Park Art Gallery in one form or another. So, you know, the council will have to accommodate them.
Well, I think there's some hope that we can shift the art collection into town into a temporary premises.
Or a new premises.
a new
in
premise.
town. Let's not get
Hunter
onto
going on
that.
that.
You know, out of 500 buildings in the inner city, 400 of them are going to need some sort of work. And
Oh, yeah.
I was speaking to Damien O'Connor, the West Coast MP today for Labour, and I mentioned Greymouth and Westport and Motueka, their problems, and he just, you know, it's huge. It's
Yes.
huge. It's everywhere.
Yes.
Any of those old provincial centres.
We've suddenly discovered that we live in the shaky isles. And that we live in an earthquake-prone. We always knew it, but didn't acknowledge it. And now we're doing something about it.
And in a lot of towns and cities, you'll find that the landlords in some of these buildings live in other towns and cities, live in other countries. And particularly those in other countries, they just won't want to know.
No.
The bills will be too high.
Walk away.
Walk away.
And we as ratepayers will be left to either demolish these buildings,
Yep.
fence them off, which looks really ugly in the centre. But there are building owners, and I know of one in particular who's about to put $1 million into quite a prominent building
Yes.
that to look at in town looks pretty structurally secure. And to think that's $1 million, I can look at numerous other buildings and
yeah.
go, well, there's just no way
$1 million
that
won't
building
go.
is not going to be
Yeah.
saved with $1 million.
Right.
And again, probably $1 million, yeah, it probably won't go far actually with modern.
But it has to be done.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it seems we're going to save our art gallery, or that one is a historic building
Oh,
anyway.
we have to. I
We have
think
to save
have
it.
to.
And the collection will still be curated somewhere else in the meantime, and then eventually move back there. But then, of course, Hunter, we've got to deal with the other situation that you were talking about, which is the museum and art gallery, which is a different collection, a different building, and what's going to happen to that. So,
Well, the historic architect Mick Heslin, who's well known around town with the New South Wales Bank, a beautiful building that was
Yes.
restored, 15
Oh,
years
yes.
ago,
Yeah.
he is saying, look, we have to be realistic here. We have to pick our buildings.
yes.
And he's actually chair of the Anderson Park Gallery Committee.
Right,
so he,
right.
you know, vested interest, but he said we've got to pick those iconic buildings and we've got to just steer down that line and get them right. Keep facades, whatever, you know, let's make the choices now.
And I
decide.
think actually that everybody in the town has got to face up to this, not just the council. When the council has to go and start spending some money, because some money has to be spent.
Well, whose money is it?
Yeah, well, it is our money, but, you know, I just hope we don't have too many detractors who say, you know, we can't spend any money at all. If
Oh,
they
there
have,
will be
if they
those
have
Well,
no
we
other
know
solution.
it's going to be ugly, Bill.
Yeah,
It's not going to be a comfortable ride for
That's
the
right.
council.
That's right. And I think that we've all got to face up to that, and we've all got to say, yes, it is going to cost us something, and there is nothing we can do about it.
And there are people that say to me, well, you know, I mean, you take the risk going into a building, yeah, fair enough, you know, but the bottom line is that the insurance companies are saying to those building owners, get them up to code, we're not going to cover you. We're not going to cover the
That's right.
lives of the people that work in those buildings, whether an earthquake happens in the next 100 years or not.
Yeah.
The price of insurance for them will go through the roof, so they will have no choice
Right.
but to either evacuate and abandon the building or bring it up to code.
Yes.
That's the reality.
You're
of it.
absolutely right. And I think, and talking about the workers there, you're making a very valid point. It's all very well for people to say, you know, well, we take a risk when I go into that building or into that shop. What about the people who are working there 8 hours a day, every day of the week? And we remember with sadness that it wasn't casual, people entering casually into buildings in Christchurch who lost their lives, but some of they were the workers who were working there. And so I believe that dealing with this situation is paramount. We're going to have to face up to it and say it will cost us money, but we basically have to put our hands in our pockets and do it, get over it, and do the best we can.
If you think back to Christchurch, so the main source of the casualties, regrettably, was in a shonkily designed and built building.
Yep.
For which
no one's been held accountable.
Well, I was going to say for which there has been
for cover.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a very good point, Malcolm. We're going to take a break. Stay with us. We'll have some topics of interest when we come back and one or two other things we want to talk about as well. There's been a lot happening. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to Newsroom. Talking of news, Malcolm, we get a lot of news. I get a lot of my news from Radio New Zealand. It's not going to be the same again.
No, change is afoot, and certainly morning report.
Morning report's totally new. Simon Mersett gone, because Jeff Robinson's retiring in April.
Yes.
Simon Mersett is
He'll
now
be going to
moving.
A new program in the afternoons.
Right, and which means Jim Moira moves on.
Yeah, moves on to what is now Checkpoint, and I'm not too sure how that's going to work actually. And coming from a radio background.
Yes, that's I was very interested in your comments.
Thank you.
Yes.
And listening to the two, I can't see it working.
You don't see blending happening.
Mary Wilson.
Mary Wilson. There's going to be a lot of give and take on both sides.
Right.
And yes, and I'm not sure how Simon Mersett's going to go in the afternoons. What Jim Moore does in the afternoons, I think, is thoroughly acceptable.
It's all right, isn't it?
It does a very good show. He's a bit loose and woolly at times, but so what?
People are asking, if it's not broken, why fix it? Yeah.
I made that comment myself on
ratings
Facebook.
Must be telling them something.
Yeah, and well, again, they're under pressure. Of course, they're government funded, not through commercials like the commercial networks are. So they will have to go to the government if they want more funding. Well, we can prove we're getting more listeners, and hopefully by making these changes, they will get more listeners.
They've been doing pretty well though. The last time I saw it, there was the most listened to program in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of facts and figures behind the numbers and in any survey, but they're under pressure and they haven't made changes for several years under the previous management. But they brought a newspaper man in from the I think it was the New Zealand Herald actually to shake it up and stir it up. It had been probably left to go too long. The old same old shade of grey.
Yes, yeah.
And not 50 Shades of Grey, I might add.
Yeah, right.
And I think there's a bigger picture going on in the whole media spectrum too, and change of management. There's change of management at Radio New Zealand. There's been a change of management at the radio network, and a change of management at MediaWorks. Both operate the commercial networks.
Okay.
And if you look back, there's been a whole lot of changing sides between the two commercial networks of various personalities, and going to different stations. Jason Gunn was with the radio network. He's going back to MediaWorks. I'm not too sure what he's going to do there. And of course, these people all come at a high price. And it's most interesting. There's another character who were at MediaWorks, Fletch and Vaughan, I think on The Rock. They've been hired by the radio network, but nobody seems to know where they're going to go.
Or why? Yeah.
Or perhaps they've just hired them, and we'll worry about them later.
So the others can't have them.
Else hasn't got them.
Well, that's part of it.
Perhaps the retirement of Jeff Robinson has precipitated this. They said, okay, well now we've got to do something. Yeah, and one thing led to the other.
I think that might be part of the whole deal. Jeff's coming up to 65, whatever his age is. Jeff, you've got a nice payout coming shortly. We might even sweeten it a bit for you. We want to make changes, subtle changes, subtle as a brick. And, you go at the end of April, nudge something else in for you.
Or else you just decided you'd had enough of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
There would be that.
Yeah,
But Again, major changes, and again, probably government focused. As I say, they're government funded, and they're probably, the new chief executive is probably under directive. Give us more listeners, then we might look at more funding. Of course, it's not just radio they're looking at now. It's all the other sources. Internet, and news coverage is becoming more expensive.
Well, this is the worry, isn't it? As this happens, Hunter, as things keep getting mixed up and stirred up and changed around, what happens to news? What happens to good commentary on what's going on in the country? Or is it because, and we've talked about this before, just more and more commercial, and we actually may be in danger of losing some of that good investigative journalism, surely?
I was shocked actually when Sean Plunkett left. I thought he was...
Well, the short answer, I think a lot of it's gone.
Yeah.
The investigative journalism you probably find in the newspaper sections on the internet.
Yes.
And having said that, TV3 do a bit.
They do.
I've been impressed with Paddy Gower's breaking of stories out of Parliament. He seems to lead the way there.
Yeah.
But investigative journalism, it's expensive, and it's got to be covered somehow.
And I mean, does it return well in the media? Does good investigative journalism? I mean, is it going to bring a return back to the broadcaster?
Probably. The short answer is probably no, and you'll probably find that the best return is those reality shows like MasterChef. I was going to say The Great Food Race, but I understand that's not rating as well as it should be or could be. The Bachelor, those shows, they bring in the money. They bring the advertisers, the sponsors, who put it on and deliver the program to an audience. Those are the programs where people watch.
An eager audience, aren't they?
Yes, yes, captive audience.
Right. X Factor.
New Zealand's Got Talent. A great exposure for a corporate to get aligned with that.
Yes, yeah.
And that's where the money is.
So basically, what you're saying with the reorganisation at Radio New Zealand.
And the reorganisation of all the other media outlets.
It's a case of wait and see. Let's see how successful this is.
Yeah. Oh, very much so. And it won't. If anyone thinks it'll happen, a miracle will happen after the first week or month. It won't. These things take time to bed in.
And we have seen a few failures, haven't we? I mean, with shows being changed, and after a week, everybody's saying, including the audience, the diminishing audience and the management, we don't think this is working.
Well, look, it took them a year to realise that with 7 Sharp.
Yeah.
And they must be watching, the number crunchers will be watching every night what the ratings are like.
They would have been in denial right from the beginning there for a while. This will come right. I'm sure it'll come right.
Yeah, and it got worse.
The building, and then months later, actually.
And speaking of 7 Sharp, I saw the first few minutes of the new version, and I thought, oh my God, this looks awful.
Right.
This looks awful.
And so I know we might have talked about this last time a little bit, but Paul Henry seems to have...
Paul Henry's another one. The number crunchers will be watching his ratings.
He seems to be fairly popular at the moment, and a different sort of broadcaster.
Yeah, and has he got a corporate sponsor to go with the show? It's 10:30 at night, late night, not prime time viewing. And he again would come at a price.
But nice guy,
Well, yes, yeah.
So
a lot
we
of people
decide when we watch things.
Yeah, that's the other
trend, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whilst we're talking about broadcasting, shows and videos, there is one video which seems to be new to this area, shall we say. A lot of you have seen it, and if you fly an aircraft, you'll keep on seeing it every time you fly in an aircraft. Air New Zealand have presented us with something quite different in terms of the safety warnings, the introduction to the aircraft. Who's seen it? You've seen it, Malcolm?
Yes, I have.
And
yes.
What do you reckon?
Describe
it to us.
It wasn't on a flight either.
Right.
It wasn't as bad as some of the commentators on the social media make out. I don't think it was. I think it's almost a stroke of brilliance.
And so, what's in it? Give us an idea of the context. We're not going to show you the clip.
They've hired some models from
swimsuit.
Yep. From
as
America.
Well as Christy Brinkley.
Christy Brinkley makes a cameo appearance from her pad in Los Angeles.
Yes.
So these people don't come cheap.
No.
And they filmed it on, was it Aitutaki Beach in the Cook Islands? And it goes through the all grey, boring, turgid stuff we used to get with somebody, giving the motions at the front of the plane. And it's all done on the beach. How do you strap your belt in? What to do if the plane nosedives into the water, you lean forward. What to do with the air vents, and got all that. But a beautiful, sunny routine. And
is it going to help? I mean, is it going to make people watch? Watch the safety video. Did you watch the safety videos, Hunter, on the other ones?
Look, I watched too much of that show, Air Crash Investigation. To ever miss
you mean you were glued to the safety videos?
Instructional video, yeah. I haven't seen this one that Malcolm's referring to. I certainly have seen stills from it, and they are very attractive young people.
Yeah.
And I mean, that sells things.
Yeah.
You can sell everything with an attractive young person.
And it's not lurid or anything like that.
No, that's good.
It's not lurid.
Well, they had Betty White on one stage doing one of them, didn't they, for the older brigade?
I have to critique it myself, but if Air New Zealand is prepared to spend a bit of money in order to present better or different safety videos, well, good on them.
Well, the budget comes straight from the regions that don't have any other options, so they just
don't have an air bridge.
Right, let's all pay for the new. Got Christy Brinkley. Okay, let's charge Invercargill commuters with $50 more a ticket. We get Christy.
Where there's no competition.
We're two little islands.
Let's not start with that. Yes.
But I think it's a stroke of brilliance, and it won't be the be-all or the end-all. They had one for the desolation of Smaug.
Oh, yes.
And there'll be an ongoing campaign, so this might last only 2 or 3 months, and they'll move on to the next one. It's probably being formulated as we speak.
We have actually seen 1 or 2 advertising campaigns like that over the years. The one which had the chimpanzees on it, for example, and which everybody became addicted to when they took it off. Remember that?
PG Tips, wasn't it?
Yeah, PG Tips, when they actually when they removed the ads from TV, the sales plummeted. People wanted the ads back on.
People still talk about the Milky Bar Kid.
That's right, yeah. So there's been some some very creative advertising
Minty's moments.
Yeah.
Minty's aren't the same anymore.
Yeah. So there you have it, basically. Air New Zealand's doing it, so good on them. And now that we've lost, I'm trying to think of his name on the ASB ads.
Good heavens, I've got an Australian-owned bag pen.
Right. But there was a big outcry because he had a Jewish name. Goldstein.
Goldstein.
I love Goldstein.
It was like, supposedly anti-Semitic or something, or stereotyping.
People just found a reason, didn't they?
That's right.
They just found a reason.
It was brilliant. It was a stroke of genius there. We missed Goldstein, so now we've got the Air New Zealand is only on the aircraft, not on TV, but it's the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Oh, I'm sure you'll find it on YouTube. I bet it's on YouTube.
It won't take very long to get there at all, I wouldn't imagine.
No.
Yes. Well, don't have a heck of a lot of time left, actually, on the show, but we wait and see what happens in the Sochi Olympics, and we do wish our athletes well, and we're really hoping for a medal. I don't know if we've got any chance of any golds there, but we look forward to maybe getting the bronze and hopefully a silver or something, and that they managed to survive those conditions over there. So if you get an opportunity, take a look at them and wish them well. Thank you for watching us. It's always good to do the show, and we'll be back again in a fortnight's time. Ka kite anō. We'll see you later.